Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily podcast. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and today we're going to be diving deep into a topic that is far too often overlooked in the realms of technology and communication. What I'm talking about is the act of listening. Because technology has provided us all with countless tools to communicate, but it seemed to me for many years now that we've actually lost the art of actually hearing each other, and you only have to browse that through your social media timelines and news feeds to see how quickly people can misunderstand each other despite having a wealth of technology and communication tools at their fingertips. This is just one of the many reasons why I've invited Heather Younger to join me on the podcast today. I consider her a close friend. She's also an author, keynote speaker, and the CEO and founder of Employee Fanatix, which is a leading consulting firm in employee engagement, leadership development, diversity, equity, inclusion. And she's on a mission to help leaders understand the power that they possess to ensure every single person in the workplace feels valued. And it was her recent book on active listening that caught my attention and sparked today's conversation, because I want to explore a data-driven approach that exposes what is disempowering your employees right now, and also help identify the changes that could have the greatest impact. And we're also going to discuss the importance of intentional communication, personal connections with team members, and creating a culture of connectivity and belonging, especially in a world of hybrid and virtual working environments. And as everybody knows that listens to this show, the big theme is technology works best when it brings people together. So buckle up and hold on tight, because no matter where you're listening in the world, it's time for me to beam your ears stateside, where Heather Younger is waiting to share her insights. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Heather. We've met everywhere from Denver to Chicago, but it's the first time that we get to sit down on a podcast together. So can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
See, boy, I'm a mother of 4 kids. That's probably the most important identifier for me. I own a company called Employee Fanatix, and we help organizations listen more effectively to their customers and employees, making sure they can use that to drive strategy forward. And I'm also a speaker and a podcast host myself.
And I've been following you for some time. I know the work you do. It's amazing. One of the big stats that stands out for me is you personally reviewed over 30,000 surveys and facilitated focus groups on a wide variety of topics. And one thing quickly became clear from that, and that is many of us don't actually listen to one another. Can you expand on that and your journey there to discovering that?
Yeah, I think the biggest part is, I always say, like, even at home, I'm not the best at this. I think we all can kind of say, oh yeah, I'm not listening to my wife too well. I'm not listening to my children too well. At work, I find this to be a strength point of mine. I don't know if it's because I'm paid to do it in most cases, or I don't know what it is. But I think the key is that often we are listening to respond. And most of us have heard of this before. We are listening to respond. We are listening to say, what's the next thing? We are always like entering interactions with our own filter. We aren't settling into thinking about like what's happening with the person on the other end. And this is leaving a huge blind spot at work. It's basically, as we look at any outcomes we're looking for, as we're looking for project implementations and better revenue, more engagement, more loyalty from customers and employees, we want these things, but we really are missing the mark because we aren't pausing enough to really hear what the other person really needs from us on the other end.
And of course, this is a daily business tech podcast. And a question I've got to ask is, we now have more technology, more communication tools than ever before. So why do you think we still need work on communicating and still have so many misunderstandings in the office?
I actually think that most people don't think of listening as communicating. Yeah. I think that we've actually changed our minds, in a sense, are like, communicating is what I say to other people and what other people say to me, but it's not the other way around. I think the key is that people are thinking that communication is a one-way street. Like, how do I say this to this person? How do they say the thing to me? But they're not thinking that the thing that's missing, or the thing that's in between, is the pause points. It's the reflection time. It's the hearing from one ear to the other ear, and then letting it resonate and figuring out what our next steps are. And I think that's where the biggest gap is at work. We can do Slack and all the other tools, but if we aren't even hearing and understanding what the other person is typing or anything on the other end, we're at a bad place.
And I also think in the last 3 years, one of the things I wanted to highlight with you today is many employees have been recruited and onboarded online, and many have worked for 12 months, possibly even more, without even meeting their new colleagues. So fast forward from that, we now have a hybrid working environment to contend with. So my question to you is, how can leaders better engage with their teams and ensure that their employees feel a part of something special, feel a part of that organization?
It's so interesting because I've been kind of answering this question a while now, obviously in the last year and a half, but yeah. I'm embarking on a study right now to dive even deeper on the impacts of people feeling connected to their teams and their managers through the hybrid work environment. So I can really get to what it is the people that are in the hybrid work environment feel about the people who are not with them and maybe are managing them. I would say this though, knowing just what I know about human nature, we often think that out of sight, out of mind, and we don't then say, okay, we need to do the same things we would have done in an office. We can't go knock on the door and kind of stand by the door frame and start talking to someone spontaneously, but we can at least be more intentional about making sure we kind of parse out time for the person to let them know that they are important. And it's not just about talking about projects and processes and all those kinds of things and how we're going to implement this new thing and this new thing. It's about how are they doing as people? What's going on with them? What's lighting them a fire? What's making things exciting for them? Or what are the barriers to just what's happening in their life and what's going on with their kids? It's being really personal, the one-on-one, because we have to be just super intentional. If we don't, this is going to slide further and further into a place of, I just saw the Health and Human Services declared that we're in an epidemic of isolation and loneliness and disconnection. And so what are the things that we can do? And I do think it's that idea of being more intentional, leaning in, taking the time, make sure it's separate from your project process meeting and make sure it's more about them as people.
And for any business leader listening, whether they're in the tech industry or not, regardless of whether their teams are in person, virtual or hybrid, where do they begin to build a culture that benefits every team member and customers alike too, and also strengthen overall engagement, improve organizational culture, and I suppose essentially create a space for everyone to have a voice? I know it's something that every business is saying they're going to try and do, but getting there is much, much harder. So is any advice around that?
Yeah, the biggest thing what I think you're getting to is, do we need to be listening more? Do we need to, is listening really the crux of it all? And so what I mean by listening's very broad in my mind. So that would be, yes, you might do an employee engagement survey, or you might do a customer survey or some kind of pulse survey, and that's great. What are you going to do with that? Do you have a plan for that? Are you going to act on that? Aside from that, are you doing listening sessions with your customers, your employees, to kind of go deeper from whatever you uncover in your survey? Are you doing culture teams? Culture teams can still work on hybrid. And are you making it fun? Is it going to be an environment where they can kind of brand themselves and they can create a charter and they can just do different things that really make them have a sense of connectivity and, again, belonging and welcome, and they still can create that even if they're at home. When they're at their kitchen table, they're not necessarily there in an office. So again, I think it's parsing out the space, finding out and including the voices of all the people cross-functional up and down the organization, and then making sure that they can do things that still feel connected and fun, and let them be the drivers of it. Don't feel like you have to be the one, if you're an executive leader or senior manager or whatever, you don't have to be the one that drives it all. Just provide the environment. Maybe it's sometimes resources, sometimes it's not, to just let them do things together and be a team and coworkers together.
And just to bring to life everything that we're talking about here, do you have any examples you might be able to share around the impact of active listening and the impact that it's had on tech leaders, business leaders, or even those leading projects or interacting with internal, external stakeholders, etc.? It'd be great to hear some examples of the kind of impact that it can have right across an organization.
Yeah, I worked in a tech organization before I went on my journey on my own, and I can remember 2 instances where the client was requesting that we make some changes in line with what they wanted for their organization, and our senior leadership team didn't listen. So they basically wanted it to be the way they wanted it, the vision internally, and failed to include that customer on an upgrade that was happening. This is a software as a service company. And they decided that they didn't want it that way. And so the customer was not at all happy. We ended up losing that business because they were like, well, if you're not going to give me what I'm asking for, you're not actually listening to me, you're going forward with what your vision is, then we aren't going to be able to work together. You can't help us meet our goals. And that's what's the most important part. Thinking back too on another customer who this wasn't in a tech space, but I can think about when there was a customer who was reaching out. They were super duper frustrated with an organizational change, a process that happened, and the internal leaders never, ever went to get customer feedback before they made a major change. And the change impacted this customer. This was like a life or death type of thing, so it was kind of healthcare based. And that impacted their process and their ability to get blood to patients, let's say. And I noticed like they weren't returning my call. They weren't being responsive to my emails. I'm like, what is happening? So I reached out to one person I knew I had a good relationship with. And I said, listen, I know there's what's going on. Like, I want to get together. Let's get together and talk about what's happening. It's like, I can sense there's some tension and some frustration. And so I did. And I just sat and listened while they pretty much, smacked me a little bit with their words. And as after that happened, I said, listen, during the conversation, I said, listen, I appreciate all the feedback. This is really valuable. I don't think we quite understood the impact of our change. Let me go back to the leadership team. Let me talk to them and see what it is that we can do. And if there's a way for us to come to the center, if there's a way for us to make a different process change. And so I went to them. And at first, the team was a little curmudgeon. They were like grumpy. And they're like, how dare that customer tell us we need to do this thing? And I'm like, well, this is a $2 million customer. So we might kind of want to be listening to them just a little bit and kind of taking their feedback. So I got convinced them to do some different things. And I went back to the customer and said, okay, what about this? This is kind of a compromise. It's not exactly what you need, but will this help? And will this make it so it's not as bumpy for you? And so we went back and forth like that a couple different times. And after doing that, they finally, okay, we're good. And so we were able to keep the customer. And in fact, because we went through that back and forth process, not only did we keep the customer, we actually were able to expand the wallet, the share of basically their spend with us, because now they let go of another vendor who was not listening also. But I was like, wait a second, something's not right. I'm noticing something. I call this recognizing the unsaid, where there's these cues that are going on in the environment and we are just not picking up on them. And we either have an opportunity to really make a positive impact on a customer or employee, or we have an opportunity to drop the ball and really kind of, mess things up for both.
And one of the things I always try and do on this podcast is talk about some of the myths and misconceptions that you may hear that might frustrate you. So I've got to ask, are there any myths or common mistakes you've seen repeated again and again in workplaces that frustrate you that we can finally lay to rest today once and for all? Is there anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think the biggest myth is that the people on the top need to make all the decisions and they have to be the ones who take action to show their strength.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because that is the exact opposite truth of it all. In fact, what needs to happen is that more people from the bottom need to be brought up to the middle so that those at the top and those at the middle, at the bottom, come together to say, how can we have a meeting of the minds for what it is we want to be here at work? And the same thing would apply to customers too, by the way. What do we want from you as an organization? What do we want from you as an employer? And for the employer to say, okay, that makes more sense. And then go forward with technology, process improvements, changes, reorgs, the mergers. But what happens is all these change efforts, all these things are taking place in vacuums. So the experiences of both customers and employees are just not great. I have other choice words, but I'm not going to use that here for Neil's sake. And so I think that's the biggest point is let's bring people together, cross-functional people. You do not need to be in an ivory tower. The people below do not need to stay there. Everybody can come together. I promise you, the people on the front line know a lot more than you think. And we need to give them more credit because I think that they can help us drive better strategies forward as it relates to anything we're trying to get to at work.
It's so refreshing to hear you say that. I get flashbacks from my IT past and the amount of business departments that would always start with technology first rather than the problem first. So it's great to hear that. And we have highlighted a few problems today, but as a solutions, not problems kind of guy, I've got to ask, what makes you hopeful, maybe even excited about the future and where things are heading?
After in the U.S., we had a lot of issues related to race relations and that George Floyd issue that came up, and that caused a lot of division inside of workplaces in our world. But one of the things that I did see were workplace leaders inside the workplace really taking paying attention, taking a pause, to hear that people at work from different backgrounds had different experiences. So they were like getting really intelligent about that. And they were willing to put more focus, resources, even strategy behind making that, and improving that experience for not only those inside the organization, but out. So here's an example real fast. I have a bank that's a client of mine, and they had already had inclusiveness was one of their values. And they decided, like kind of right after all of the issues that really kind of went up higher, mostly in the US, but it was kind of all world everywhere, right? Everybody was like, up in arms. They decided to say, I'm going to move this thing that's a value right now, which is kind of like lower level in the organization, to a strategic pillar in the organization. So it was one of 3 pillars, and one of them was inclusion, which means now it moved it up to the board level, and now had everybody's eyes on it. And it was going to be, they were going to look at like, what's happening with our board? How many people that we have, are they really diverse and do they have a voice? Are we lending in communities that actually can use the money, right? So they were looking at it more holistically and went deeper. And so that's kind of stuff that gives me hope, because it's like, oh my gosh, we may have started down one path, but they opened their eyes bigger than they needed to really make broad changes that could impact both their people they serve in and outside their organization.
Well, I know how incredibly busy you are. And so first of all, a big thank you for investing a little time and sharing your insights with everyone listening. But also, before you go, I'm going to see if there's something we can do for you. Now, some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests or might even listen to this podcast. So if I was to say to you, is that a person you'd love to sit down, have a private breakfast or lunch with? A person B, and why?
I had one person in my mind to start, but I have to say, actually, you.
Nah.
You. Yes, Neil Hughes. You have interviewed, I'm sure, again, like you said, some of the top people. That means you know so much. There's so much in that head of yours. I'd like to get to the bottom of the things that excites you, the things that give you hope, and what you're looking at in the tech space, and what do we need to prepare ourselves for when we're looking at workplace. So I would say you, spending more time talking to you about all the things you've learned by talking to all these great people as well. And you are wonderful in and of yourself. So,
oh man, 2,400 interviews. You're the first one to make me blush there. But we will make that happen. We will make that happen. We do get to meet over in the US, and I know you come over here sometime. So we will make that happen. Trust me. And also, you're also an author and a podcast host yourself. So can you tell everyone listening a little about your new book, first of all?
Yes. The newest book is called The Art of Active Listening, How People at Work Feel Heard, Valued, and Understood. That book is meant for everybody at work. You're basically interacting with anybody at work. So it's going to be those talking to customers, those talking to board members, those talking to people who report to them, and coworkers in between. And then the book before that was The Art of Caring Leadership. And both of them are really focused on workplace. But this last one is more, let's say, inclusive, more holistic, and it's looking at everybody in their interactions at work. And then the podcast is, of course, called Leadership with Heart. And it's focused on me interviewing people who really show more and more emotional intelligence, are focused a lot on putting their people first, as that's the focus of that podcast, which, of course,
And for anybody to find out more information about you, the work that you're doing, because I know you do a lot of speaking work as well, what's the best website to send everyone to?
I would say that if you're looking on the speaking side, it's heatheryounger.com, pretty darn easy, heatheryounger.com. If you're looking for advisory work, kind of consultative work on how to create ERGs, how to create culture teams, how to really use insights from your organization to drive forward listening and strategy, I would say employeefanatix.com would be the best place to go.
Well, I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And this is a huge part of your work, the leadership with heart, bringing people together, ensuring everyone has a voice. I've been a huge fan of yours for years. It's an incredible honor for me to have you here on my show. But more than anything, just thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today.
Absolutely. Always a huge pleasure to be with one of the best people on the planet. Thanks, Neil.
So a huge thank you to Heather Younger for sharing her insights on the power of active listening and the importance of incorporating everyone's voice in an organisation. And also a big thank you for making me blush after 2,500 interviews. So it'll be great to sit down with Heather and have some of those conversations as I look back on those podcast interviews. But for me, today was all about Heather, and her message was clear. Active listening is not just a tool. It's actually a doorway to increase belonging, loyalty, profitability, and innovation. And that is crucial inside every organisation. And I think it's also a mechanism that benefits all team members and customers. By strengthening overall engagement, you can improve organisational culture and ensure everyone has a voice, be it in a virtual or in-person setting. And I think as we all continue to navigate this hybrid work environment together, I think Heather offered a timely reminder around the value of intentional communication and the importance of making every single team member feel heard and valued. So for everyone listening, I want to include you in this conversation because I hope it encouraged you to take a step back, listen more, and incorporate the lessons that Heather shared into your leadership strategies. But I'm conscious we can only talk about so much in a 30-minute podcast, and that's why I want to invite you in here. Was there something that Heather or myself missed from today's conversation? Is there something that you've tried and had success with? Are there other hurdles or problems that you're struggling to overcome? Please, as always, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You get me on LinkedIn and Twitter, just @NeilC.Hughes. And I also invite anyone to come on here and sit down and have a conversation with me too. But once again, I'm Neil Hughes. You've been listening to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Please remember, technology works best when it brings people together. And join me next time for more insights from leaders in the tech industry and beyond. If you take away anything from today's episode, keep listening, keep learning, keep connecting. And more than anything, just thank you for joining me on today's episode. I cordially invite you to join me again tomorrow, but until next time, don't be a stranger.